and it doesn't appear from a defense attorney's perspective that this was intended to be a terroristic type of murder.
So one other thing I want to ask.
You see Jake Tapper? Wait, she's straying from the narrative. I didn't know she was going to say that. Wait, she's not going to push him as a terrorist like the rest of us?
Hey, it's Jordan. I am in Flint, Michigan, East Palestine, Ohio, Tumwa, Iowa. Please support the only independent outlet on the ground covering what the corporate media covers up.
Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. The fallout continues as Luigi Mangione, the alleged shooter of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, has been charged with first-degree murder and second-degree murder as an act of terror in New York City. Well, defense attorneys and former prosecutors are stating that terrorism charge might be, quote, playing with fire and an overreach for prosecutors trying to actually convict Mangione. Before we get to that, let me show you part of Alvin Bragg, the district attorney of Manhattan's, in my opinion, twisted logic as to why Luigi Mangione is being charged as a terrorist.
Sure, and my point, the statute talks about attempts to influence or coerce a civilian population. The statute talks about intending to influence a policy of government, and it talks about seeking to put forth things sort of similar to that by murder. So the statute, the plain language of the statute is clear. Obviously, we've charged it. The grand jury has voted on it, and we intend to go forward and prove it. But I think it does help to take a step back, and think about the proof in the case, some of the writings. I'm not going to get into too much of that, but and the actual reaction. In the middle of Midtown, the beginning of a busy day, tourists, commuters, business people, the intent was to sow terror.
So it sure seems that they have elevated Brian Thompson because of his class as a corporate CEO. He was making about $10 million, that Luigi Mangione's act of offing a CEO, allegedly, was meant to influence, have political influence. Yet his manifesto says nothing about, calling for universal health care, Medicare for all. Does talk about his disdain for the for-profit healthcare industry, but I think they would have a very hard time nailing Luigi Mangione or kind of painting a picture that he was looking for a specific policy outcome unless they have more of his writings that specifically call for universal health care or Medicare for all. It seems that his writings went both ways. He had some left-wing views and some more right-wing views. But this act of terror charge that they added on is not being met by all folks in the law enforcement and legal community as a slam dunk. In fact, it's being rejected by several. Let me show you a clip from CNN, of all places, which has pushed nonstop propaganda and crocodile tears for the corporate CEOs after this. They had a trial lawyer on yesterday who said that this was an overreach to charge him with terrorism.
The indictment is already handed up by the grand jury. They'll present him with that indictment and his attorney, and undoubtedly he'll enter a not guilty plea. But there's something I really want to point out here, which is highly unusual, and it's my opinion that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office has a bit overreached in this indictment. They were originally going to go forward with a murder 2 charge against Luigi Mangione, which is just having the defendant having the intent to cause death of another human being and the defendant being the cause of that death. They've now gone forward and enlisted this terrorism component to a murder 1 indictment, which means they presented evidence in front of the grand jury, which is a group of 24 people from the community, without a judge in place, just a district attorney and a group of 24 grand jurors who hear evidence. It is undoubted, or I believe that the DA presented that alleged manifesto to try to get this terrorism charge added on as murder one, but they're going to have a harder time proving that in court for one reason, and I'll make it fast. This victim was shot in the back of the head, not in the front of the head, on a quiet sidewalk, early in the morning, in the dark. And it doesn't appear, from a defense attorney's perspective, that this was intended to be a terroristic type of murder.
So one other thing I want to ask.
You see Jake Tapper? Wait, she's straying from the narrative. I didn't know she was going to say that. Wait, she's not going to push him as a terrorist like the rest of us? I think that lawyer makes a lot of sense. I think she is a defense lawyer. And by the way, just common sense, terrorism, in addition to the, wanting to instill fear and terror, usually you want to kill as many people as humanly possible, right? Well, I mean, in the notes they found from Luigi Mangione, he is in writing, saying he thought about using a bomb, but after he changed his mind because he didn't want to kill innocents. Quote, what do? You whack the CEO at the annual parasitic bean counter convention. It's targeted, precise, and doesn't risk innocence. Again, you don't have to condone the fact that he murdered Brian Thompson, but adding terrorism to it, which we went through in our live stream yesterday, is beyond a slippery slope that will backfire on all of us, because they will then start, charging, activists, regular people as domestic terrorists if you go as, even look the wrong way at a police officer or politician. But I don't know many terrorists that in writing are saying, I don't want to kill innocent people. Do you? Let's play more of this attorney who clearly states this is an overreach.
Oh, because arguing this was a terroristic act when he was on a quiet street in the dark shooting a victim in the back of the head and then intending to influence the whole world about the insurance industry was an unintended consequence of this murder. No one expected the social media outpouring, the disturbing social media outpouring from this act. And to have the district attorney and law enforcement from New York mention that there was a social media outcry in relation to a terroristic act is putting the cart before the horse. I mean, the murder happened first, the outcry was second, and totally unpredictable. So I think this might be a case of overreaching on a murder one. I could see why they have enough evidence, or they believe, law enforcement, that they have enough evidence for murder two. But this is going to be a very interesting turn.
John Miller, I want to play.
And by the way, as she said, it was an unintended consequence. I mean, we can't get in Mangione's head. Maybe he wanted, a big response, but I doubt he even knew there would be this response. But in the writings, his manifesto doesn't actually state a specific agenda: universal health care, Medicare for all, a public option. It basically just states statistics about the for-profit health insurance industry, and that these parasites had it coming. There's no specific or, overarching agenda or political goal, which is what Alvin Bragg was talking about as in the statute for terrorism. There's also another element that I think is important for why it's not only overreach, but as one former federal prosecutor put it, potentially playing with fire. The prosecutors playing with fire, charging him terrorist, and that is a concept known as jury nullification, which basically means the jury might actually think the crime was committed, but they disregard the actual law, which a jury can, and it's legal for them to do so because, they basically agree with the actual crime that was committed. That's not legally how it's written, but that's basically the concept. A former defense attorney, a former federal prosecutor said as much. This is on News Nation.
I'm curious. The DA, in announcing the terrorism, talked about the fact that it was meant to inspire fear. And we just heard the police commissioner, really denounce these wanted posters that went up around Manhattan. And many of the nation's top chief executives are certainly afraid right now. There's a deck of playing cards circulating online with the faces of other CEOs they could be targeted as well.
They could be. And I've been doing this a long time, more than 2 decades. I have never, ever seen an accused murderer with this much sympathy, this much support on traditional and social media. And it's just something that we may never see again. So obviously in a criminal case, you have to get 12 out of 12 jurors unanimously to convict. And this case presents a very real possibility of a holdout juror, a stealth juror that tries to get on this panel to send a message to executives, the healthcare industry. So again, we're really playing with fire here as far as the prosecution is concerned by adding these charges.
Playing with fire, pointing out that it's going to be hard to get 12 jurors, all 12 in America, where everyone has a healthcare horror story, to agree that they might agree that he committed the crime, but they might find extenuating circumstances and, feel sympathy for him. We're seeing online, plenty of people do, and you can't just lie to get on a jury. So there could be a person that just basically lies and doesn't allude that their agenda is to find him not guilty. Let me play more of this where he further elaborates on why the jury will be very critical in this as to particularly with a terror charge, that this might be playing with fire.
I'm not saying I agree with it, but in Mangione, you have someone who's rich, who's smart, who's good looking, and is now famous. So I'm not surprised that he has this fan club and he's a hero of sorts. So he is somewhat of a sympathetic defendant. Again, not saying I agree with it, but he does present a real potential problem at trial. And now we're going to get into all of this and the evidence that's come out, his manifesto, his back surgery, his experimenting with psychedelics. It does appeal to a certain percentage of the population. And now all that's fair game by charging the terrorism and trying to escalate this to first-degree murder, whereas could have been a simple case. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Basically, what he's talking about there is the concept of jury nullification. Let me give you specifically what that means, because I was paraphrasing before. But the Wall Street Journal actually wrote about this, that Luigi Mangione can benefit, and it could be a strategy for his attorneys to go for jury nullification. This is from the Wall Street Journal. Another long shot route for defense lawyers might be to attempt to generate juror sympathy for Mangione by tapping into public anger directed at the healthcare industry. A crowdfunding campaign for Mangione's legal bills has raised more than $130,000 and prompted sympathetic messages from numerous donors. I actually think that's over 140,000 now. The goal, lawyers said, would be jury nullification, a scenario in which jurors reach a not guilty verdict to send a message, even though they conclude a defendant committed the crime. So essentially, hey, you know what? Yeah, he committed the crime, but a jury could say, not verbally, but agree upon themselves, this parasite had it coming. I mean, that's basically what could happen in this case. And I want to show you some things because it honestly, I don't know if you could find 12 jurors that don't have a personal healthcare horror story. I really don't. I want to show you this clip. If you missed it, I did an interview with a former UnitedHealthcare worker over the weekend where she revealed that they had a quota system for denying claims. And I then got response to this from others who shared at other healthcare companies. They also had a quota system, meaning employees were ordered to deny a certain amount of claims.
I would hear people, on break time or whatever, when we would all kind of come together in this kitchen clutch, and people would be talking about what they were told to do their job. It wasn't my job, so I can't say 100%. Yes, we have to deny so many claims per month to meet our shareholders' expectations, but I do know that people were complaining because, they had to meet a certain amount of claim denials.
So people were telling you that there was a quota for how many denials?
Yep.
Which is kind of like less deadly, but, cops towards the end of the month, you have a quota, how many tickets you have to give out.
Right.
So I posted that. I don't know. I think it's got almost 300,000 views, that interview. We'll put the link to the interview in the description if you haven't seen it. But I posted that, And I'm already seeing responses from others on social media sharing that they have people in their lives who work for the healthcare industry or other companies that the same thing went on. I'll read you some of this. By the way, I've reached out to these folks for an interview, so we'll see. But this is just from someone online, Paula, responding to my interview. My mom used to work for a different insurance company, and I remember her coming home crying because she got in trouble for not denying enough claims. She got fired for not, quote, meeting quota after a couple of months. They fired her mother for not wrongfully denying enough claims. Let that sink in. I don't know what company that was, but that was just one person. Somebody else responded to my interview, specifically the part about UnitedHealthcare having a quota for denying claims. A sister-in-law who worked at Aetna said they told her to deny claims for frivolous reasons. She would grind her teeth at night. She eventually quit, couldn't take it anymore. I read you this not only because they're horror stories, and please support Status Coup. As far as I know, we're the only ones covering this as in depth, and we have for years covered protests against the for-profit healthcare system. We have for years covered protests demanding universal healthcare, Medicare for all. This takes a lot of resources. You could support us for as low as $5 a month. But I show you this because juries are not in a bubble. So even though they're told don't watch news about your trial that you're a jury on, don't talk about it. They don't live in a bubble. You think the jury on the OJ case wasn't hearing and talking about it? They're not supposed to, but they're only human. So as this case goes on, jurors, who many of them might have healthcare horror stories, they're going to hear more healthcare horror stories. They're going to hear more of what I just showed you, insurance companies having quotas for denial and other, evil, immoral, predatory practices. You don't think that's going to affect them or make them more sympathetic to Luigi Mangione? Again, two things can be true. You don't have to outright condone murder. I don't. I don't think vigilante justice, although I understand it, I don't think it is the right way of going about it because I think it will backfire on all of us. You start going around gunning down all the for-profit predatory CEOs, oh my God, the police, the government will unleash the police, possibly the military, 10 times worse on us. And everybody will be charged as a domestic terrorist, even if you look at a cop or a politician the wrong way. We're already kind of seeing it. I give you our coverage of the Cop City protests down in Georgia, where peaceful protesters were charged as domestic terrorists for holding signs or running from police. And I would have run from police too, because they literally shot and killed an unarmed protester named Tortuguita in Georgia at the Cop City protest. So I might have wanted to run from police too. But I got to tell you, in addition to the fact that I think the terrorism charges are dangerous, I think they are beyond an overreach. I think they are very close to what George Orwell wrote about and warned about in 1984. I don't really think they would stick. Lastly, I want to play a clip from Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky talking about the concept of terror. I don't know when this is from. It looks like many years ago. But I think that Noam Chomsky's words on terrorism and the United States as the preeminent terrorist force are pretty relevant considering what's going on right now.
First of all, when we use the term terror, we have to recognize that, like most terms of political discourse, has two meanings. There's a literal meaning and there's the doctrinal meaning. Now, in the literal meaning, terror is what's described in U.S. Code of Laws. It's the threat or use of violence to intimidate, typically against civilians, to intimidate populations for political, ideological, and other ends. Well, nobody can use that definition, because if you use that definition, it follows instantly that the United States is a leading terrorist state, that Britain is another leading terrorist state, and so on. So the literal definition, the one that's in the U.S. Code of Laws, is unusable. Then we go to the doctrinal definition, the one that's used in the media and scholarship and so on. That's the same as the official definition, but with a condition, a qualification. It only applies to what they do to us, not what we do to them. Okay, that's the doctrinal meaning. I'll now use it in the doctrinal sense. That's totally dishonest, of course. As to what to do about the threat of terror in the doctrinal sense, meaning the terror by them against us, there are a lot of things to do. One thing is to not increase the threat. That's a simple step. Don't act in order to increase the threat. Now, the U.S. consistently, and Britain, act in order to increase the threat of terror. Not because they want terror, but because it's just not a high priority. So take the invasion of Iraq. As I mentioned, that was undertaken with the expectation, since amply confirmed, that it would increase the threat of terror.
I don't even think I could add anything to sound smarter than that. He's absolutely right. We have reached beyond a slippery slope at this point. Obviously, Luigi Mangione allegedly knew what he was doing, and was willing to take the risks of prison time, potentially for the rest of his life. But charging him as a terrorist is very, very dangerous for all of us. We will continue to stay on this. It's possible he might be extradited to New York as early as tomorrow. If that happens, we will be there on the ground to cover it for you. Support Status Coup, statuscoup.com/join.